Welcome to the show. I'm Leah Wilson, and the story we are talking about today will become a movie. Mark my words. Today, I have two guests with me that are winning on a huge issue, and that is the issue of removing fluoride from our water, from our public water supply. So, I have Scott Kiley, who is our Stand for Health Freedom Associate Director for Local Advocacy. Welcome, Scott. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Michael. It's really a pleasure to be here today. Michael, just giving a little bit of context here to what we've been able to do over the last 3 or 4 years. In 2023, we created in Collier County, and my wife and I live in Collier County, we created a Health Freedom Bill of Rights ordinance. And that ordinance was instrumental to us ending water fluoridation in Collier County, which we did in February of 2024. We ended water fluoridation, and the tool, the catalyst for ending that water fluoridation in February of 2024 was the fact that this Health Freedom Bill of Rights ordinance, it codified informed consent in Collier County. And so we were able to work with our commissioners to realize that water fluoridation violates informed consent, and it violates our own county ordinance, and it violates our own state ordinance in 381.026. And they voted 5-0 to remove it. It was wonderful. I mean, we have some incredible commissioners in Collier County, best in the state. But I do want to say, Michael, that the work that you have done, you, your father, the team at Fluoride Action Network, the foundational work that you've done, of course, is absolutely incredible. So let me just start by saying thank you for all of that. All of the work we've done would not be possible without the work that you and your team have done. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Scott. And it's been great getting to work with you in the past few months since the court's ruling, and working with you on some of the incredible progress that you have been making in Florida. And certainly I'm hoping to see that spread elsewhere across the United States. And it is, obviously Utah banned fluoridation, and that was a very significant, historic moment. And Leah, thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate the opportunity. I look forward to our conversation here.
Absolutely. Scott and I are honored to have you, Michael. And for our listeners, Michael Connett specializes in toxic tort law and recently had a huge win in a landmark case against the U.S. EPA. So the Environmental Protection Agency, it's no small entity to go against. And the ruling that Michael had deemed fluoridation as an unreasonable risk to children's health. And that is a tectonic shift in how fluoridation is viewed in public policy and science. And I'm sure that it's going to change how it is viewed by Americans. So, Michael, you've become the premier expert in this, as litigators often become in cases of this magnitude, in this case against the EPA. So can you just start out by telling all of us, why is fluoride even in the water?
Well, fluoride, the stated purpose of adding fluoride to drinking water is to reduce tooth decay, cavities. And that's what makes water fluoridation, this practice of adding fluoride chemicals to our water, that's what makes it very unique, because it's the only chemical we add to water that doesn't treat the water itself. It's not making your water safe to drink. It's not killing the bugs and bacteria that could get you sick. Instead, it's treating you, the consumer, with a drug. And so it is a form of medication where you, the consumer, have no choice. And so in that sense, it's a very, I think, outdated practice that violates people's rights, medical rights, to, informed consent. Because with all other medicine, we, the the patient, if you will, have that right to make the decision for ourselves after being informed about the risks and benefits. So that's what water fluoridation is. It is using the public water supply to provide a medical treatment.
And that's what makes it interesting when you say the consumer doesn't have a choice. Well, the consumer is the public at large. I mean, if you're piped into your city's water supply, to your county water supply, I mean, Scott can speak more to this too. With it takes some research to understand where your water is coming from and who is governing that water supply locally. But as a consumer, if you are a part of society, you're being affected. If you're eating at any restaurant, even if you're controlling the water in your home, that's the city's consumption. So it's interesting to see a simple principle of medical ethics being leaped over nationwide. It's a little bit shocking.
Yeah, and when you're adding fluoride to public water supplies, especially to the extent that we're doing so in the United States, over 200 million people have water that's where fluoride is added, then you're going to be adding it to a lot of processed foods and beverages. And so even if you don't live in an area that fluoridates its water, your sodas, your reconstituted juices, and a lot of your processed foods, beers, you name it. There's a lot of food and beverage that you're going to be consuming that are fluoridated. And so that's why, even when your own community ends fluoridation, if for no other reason, you still have your own individual interest in seeing that the United States as a whole ends this practice, because until we end this practice en masse, you're still going to be exposed to fluoridated products, in your food and drinks.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Michael, the EPA or the federal judge, Edward Chen's ruling against the EPA, that 7-year battle, right? That 7-year battle that you lived every second, every minute of every day, probably for way more than the 7 years. Your father was involved in that battle, significantly involved. Just an incredible milestone in this fight against fluoride. Can you kind of walk us through, we got to the ruling, the unreasonable risk to the health of children. What were the significant milestones in your mind? There's been censorship, there's been suppression of information, there have been countless delays. You got there. Your team, you got there. I saw the summary and your presentation to the citizens in New Zealand. That was spectacular. I think it was about an hour and 45 minutes long. I know I've watched it at least 3 times. Just spectacular. But if you could just summarize that for us, kind of in the briefest form, with the most significant milestones that led to that ruling, that would just be fantastic.
Certainly. I'll start with the milestones that occurred before we filed the case. And the 2 major ones were, one, in 2006, the National Research Council, which is part of the National Academy of Sciences, released a comprehensive review of the toxicology of fluoride. And in that review, they provided a lengthy discussion about a lot of animal data that was already in existence showing that fluoride can damage the brain. And the NRC also pointed to some emerging studies from China that had found that IQ in children living in areas with elevated fluoride are reduced, or there's an association between fluoride and reduced IQ. Those studies there wasn't that many studies at that time. The NRC was cautious in interpreting them, but nevertheless, the NRC really was flagging that, hey, there's a significant concern here, given this animal data and these emerging human studies. So the NRC really put neurotoxicity of fluoride on the map. And then in 2012, a team of Harvard scientists published a meta-analysis where they looked at many other studies of fluoride and IQ that were published after the NRC. And they really, again, pointed to a serious concern here with fluoride in the brain. And those are the two main studies that we relied upon in filing our case. And we filed our case back in 2017. But then during the pendency of the litigation, there were some really significant things that happened. One is we had these birth cohort studies funded by the National Institutes of Health, NIH, which found in North America, so these were studies in Canada and Mexico, they found significant relationships between prenatal fluoride exposure and reduced IQ in children. And these are at low levels of exposure, the kinds of exposures that we get in fluoridated areas. And they were very well done studies. We were able to call the scientists conducting these studies to trial, and they explained their findings to the judge. And I think that testimony and that evidence was really significant. And then to top it off, we had the National Toxicology Program, which is the subject matter expert body at the federal government on the harmful effects of chemicals. The National Toxicology Program conducted a systematic review of all of the literature on fluoride in the brain, and they concluded that, yes, there is a consistent body of science now linking fluoride to neurotoxic effects, particularly IQ loss. And the NTP basically concluded that this association between fluoride and adverse effects on the brain, IQ loss, it can't be explained by biases or limitations in the studies. Like the things you look to explain away an association don't seem to do so here, and that the effect appears to be real. And that conclusion by the NTP was probably the most significant one for the court, because you're dealing with a government body, government agency. The court, I think, gave the NTP a lot of weight because of their stature. And I think the NTP's findings really were critical in the ultimate determination from the court.
Yeah, and Michael, in learning and in soaking up all the information on Fluoride Action Network, the most critical elements, and trying to make the case at a local level, the cross-examination and the deposition testimony from folks like Oral Health Director Casey Hannon and EPA's Dr., I believe it's Stanley Barone, just such compelling testimony. In my mind, it's like, nail in the coffin kind of testimony where, for example, they don't recommend fluoride for pregnant women. They don't recommend fluoride there's no in utero benefit. There's no benefit in the first 6 months of life. And then you have Dr. Barone's testimony, which is just damning as well with regard to the 10x safety threshold. Talk about that in the significance of the judge's ruling and how much that played into it. Because, in my mind, I try to encourage elected officials on a local level to watch that deposition testimony. It is so telling. How can you add fluoride to public drinking water if they have no data to show that it is safe at any level?
Yeah, I think that both through the testimony of the CDC as well as other sources in this case, I think the judge was mindful of the fact that EPA did not present any data, or certainly no compelling data, to indicate that water fluoridation is safe. So we weren't dealing with a situation where the EPA has like that we had to contradict a established body of evidence showing an absence of harm from fluoridated water. And the judge at one point asked David Savitz, who's one of EPA's main experts at trial, he asked him, is like, well, do you think we have evidence to show that water fluoridation is safe for the brain? Do you feel comfortable with the, and Savitz was like, no, I don't think we have that evidence. And so Savitz wasn't convinced that we have enough evidence of harm, but he certainly admitted that we don't have evidence to show it's safe, and I think, so that's like an important, like, initial point. Like, we couldn't meet our burden in this case by simply saying we don't have sufficient evidence of safety. We had to show evidence of risk, and we did. But I think it's important to know that we weren't butting our heads up against 80 years of safety data, right? So, like, and that made EPA's job harder because they couldn't point to 80 years of safety data, you know? And then with respect to Dr. Barone, who is EPA's main risk assessment expert in the office that manages this TSCA statute, the Toxic Substances Control Act, Dr. Barone is no doubt about it, a very knowledgeable, accomplished risk assessment scientist. He's also a neurotoxicologist. He actually has a training and focus on the brain. And at trial, we spent a lot of time asking Dr. Barone about how EPA assesses risk. You know, we really wanted to educate the court on how the agency handles other chemicals besides fluoride, right? Because we didn't want to be held to a overly burdensome standard of proof, okay? We wanted to use the standard of proof that EPA uses to protect Americans from other toxic chemicals, right? And, you know, as Dr. Barone explained at trial, EPA uses basically a margin of safety. They call it a benchmark margin of exposure, which is a kind of gobbledygook for most ordinary people, but it amounts to a margin of safety. And by that, and there's various reasons why EPA does that. And one of the reasons is that EPA recognizes that we are all very different in how we respond to toxic compounds. Some people, fortunately, are very resistant to the effects of even the most toxic chemicals like asbestos and whatnot. You could expose them to lots of the chemical and they're going to be okay. But some people are very vulnerable to the effects of toxic compounds. And the EPA recognizes that. So when you're dealing with a practice like water fluoridation, where you're exposing over 200 million people, Dr. Barone recognized that there's going to be a large range of variability in how people are responding. And given that, Dr. Barone recognized that you do need a margin of safety for fluoride. So you take and by that, Scott, it means you take the level of fluoride that you're reasonably confident, based on current data, can cause harm. In this case, IQ loss. You take that level, and you don't set your safety standard like 1 inch, 1 hair below that level, right? You don't do that. That's not good enough. Okay.
Mm-hmm. That's
you got to
right.
set the safe level with a sufficient margin to protect everybody, right? And Dr. Barone testified that margin, according to EPA principles, would need to be at least a factor of 10. At least a factor of 10.
At least there's a 30x and there's a 100x, as I understand.
EPA uses 30x and 100x all the time. For instance, EPA did a risk evaluation for PCE, which is an organic solvent. And for that chemical, the effect of interest, the critical effect, was neurotoxicity, cognitive deficits, okay? And EPA used a margin of safety of 100. to protect against PCE-induced neurotoxicity, okay? So a margin of safety of 10 is not a large margin in the context of EPA risk assessments. And, the big problem for EPA in this case, and ultimately one of the major reasons why we won the case, is if you use a margin of safety of 10 for fluoride, water fluoridation is done. It's over. There is no way water fluoridation can survive a margin of safety of 10 because you have so much data showing that, at 1.5 parts per million and in that range that you see consistently reductions in IQ. Okay, the National Toxicology Program agreed that above 1.5 parts per million, you have consistent evidence linking fluoride to IQ loss. And so you use a margin of safety of 10 to 1.5, and you're down to 0.15, which is like 5 times less than we add to our water, right? So that is the, water fluoridation cannot survive the scrutiny of EPA risk assessment. And EPA, Scott, has known this for a long time. Okay, they have known that they cannot use their normal risk assessment procedures with fluoride because if they do, it's game over. Water fluoridation is done. It's toast. So they've always avoided using their risk assessment principles, which protect Americans for all these other chemicals. They've always held off on applying it to fluoride. And that's what was one of the most satisfying things about this case, was educating the court on how EPA normally does its business, and then the court realizing that and then applying it to water fluoridation. And once the court applied EPA's standard operating procedure to water fluoridation, done. Unreasonable risk.
Unreasonable risk. Well, bravo. The way you teased that out of a difficult witness. Dr. Barone was not an easy witness. The way you teased that out and the way you articulate it, I've made video clips of that. I share it with local elected officials. If they're listening, it resonates. And in my mind, it's a stake in the heart.
Yeah. And you have so many smoking guns, Michael. I mean, an attorney is always looking for the smoking gun to win their case. And I'm seeing 5, 6 smoking guns that you've already described in the few minutes we've been talking. So you mentioned the effect on the brain. It sounds like that's the entire crux of this issue, lowering IQ, neurotoxic effects. And we just heard the Health and Human Services Secretary Kennedy in his very first press conference, his inaugural press conference, told America, we are not okay with what's happening to the brains of our children. The autism rates are only climbing. They're staggering. They're devastating right now. And I imagine that your case is a part of this inquiry. What do you see with that?
Well, I certainly think that when you have like the kind of prevalence of neurodevelopmental disorders that we have in the United States, that we need to be doing everything we can to be limiting our exposure to neurotoxicants, right? I mean, you don't have to sit around and wait to find out if fluoride could be contributing to autism. Certainly I don't think that is a resolved, what role fluoride may be playing in that. There is a study that recently came out which found an association between fluoridated water and autism, but it's not, there's not that much data on that specific connection. But if you have a nationwide problem with neurodevelopmental disorders, learning deficits, behavioral problems, right? You should be removing our exposures to neurotoxic compounds. And the water is certainly a place that you don't want to be exposed to a neurotoxic compound, because if it's in your water, It is a daily, ongoing, repeated exposure, morning, afternoon, and night, on repeat forevermore. And so, like, just as a matter of basic common sense and caution, we should be ending this practice of water fluoridation. I would also add, Leah, that our case certainly focused on the neurodevelopmental aspect of fluoride's health effects. However, there are many other health effects with fluoride exposure that really should be that people should be mindful of and aware of, but we could maybe talk about that later. But I don't want to convey the impression that it's only the neurodevelopmental risk that is of concern.
It's so true that it's a common sense proposition that if we have neurodevelopmental setbacks in our nation, that we're done seeing these trends climb and climb and climb. We're done ignoring them. That let's just get a policy that says if there's a neurotoxicant, we're going to eliminate it. Like, what is the justification to keep something like this around? And I think that it becomes staggering in other areas too when you look at how slow the government is with identifying things in our food supply and saying, oh, we're going to remove this one ingredient, even though there's a whole class of ingredients that fit under that. So I love what you're doing to expose how the government works. This case is so many different layers. And is it true that in the expert testimony you extracted, they even admitted that this toxicant passes through the placenta and gets into the brains of babies? So is it possible? This is being blamed on genetics, but there's triggers that can happen for delays even while the baby's in utero.
Right. Well, I think it's certainly well accepted that for something like autism, you're usually looking at an interplay between genetics and environmental factors. So you may have some inherent vulnerabilities or susceptibilities on the genetic level, but unless you have the right environmental target, unless you have an environmental insult at the right time, like a window of vulnerability, you're not going to get autism. Okay, so it's one part genetics, one part environment, and that applies to many other conditions, right? So exposing children in the womb to fluoride, which is a neurotoxicant, there is, it's only, we don't need to know every possible consequence of that, right? Like, we don't need to have the final study that definitively shows every possible unintended consequence of that. Like, if we wait for that kind of proof, we're going to be waiting another 100 years and we're just exposing hundreds of millions of people. Like, once you know certain basic predicate facts, fluoride's a neurotoxicant, right? Like, let's move on, folks. Let's get this out of the water and then let the scientists do their studies without us people being the guinea pigs for their next 50 years of research.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. Will the public be the unwilling guinea pigs? And I think that's part of the message, Scott, that you've been taking locally is, are you going to sit there and let your constituents that you wave to in the grocery store be guinea pigs to this? So tell us, Scott, about your second wins. You had your first win in Naples on the heels of some of the things that were uncovered with Michael's case. And what happened with your second win in Florida and the success that followed that?
Yeah, thanks, Leah. The whole reason that we're doing this is to get fluoride out of the water, right? And so, Michael, you've given us this foundation to build on. Collier County was our first win. And by the way, just a team of local advocates, right? It's not done with one person. My wife and I were involved. We created that Health Freedom Bill of Rights ordinance that was a foundational element to help us remove fluoride via the right of informed consent. And then what we learned is the city of Naples, even though it's in Collier County, the city of Naples has its own city council and their own ordinances and rules, even though they're within Collier County. So we understood that we needed to focus on the city of Naples to get fluoride out of their water. So we moved to Naples next. And, we get to know the lay of the land with the city council. And what we learned there is there's a vice mayor by the name of Terry Hutchison. And Terry was our man on the inside, supportive of ending water fluoridation. Now, the timing of this was just beautiful because I started talking to Terry around September 1st of 2024. And lo and behold, on September 24th, we get Judge Chen's ruling. I mean, it was just magical timing. And then on October 2nd, we were in there at the Naples City Council. We, my wife and I, Dr. Joelle Bohemier was with us, Dr. Richard Schroeder, Dr. Tim Driscoll, a number of different citizens, Dr. Pam Cunningham. So we recruit all the doctors that are health freedom warriors. We come in, we speak during public comments. We almost got it done in one meeting on October 2nd. The only reason we didn't was because the city attorney held us up and said, we have an ordinance from 1950 that we need to change to do this properly, and we should put it out for public notice. But on that day, October 2nd, we knew we had 4 out of 7 votes to remove fluoride. So after October 2nd, there were 2 additional meetings, one in early November, and then public advertisement, and then on December 2nd, they voted to change the 1950 ordinance, and they voted in a new resolution to direct the city manager to end public water fluoridation by the end of the year, right? I think it was by January 1st, 2025. And, this process is easy. Once you have the resolution, it can happen immediately. As I understand, it's a touch of a button on a touch screen or on an app that closes the valve and stops adding fluoride to the water. And that's what happened that afternoon. So just a beautiful thing. And it's important, of course, to share this story, Michael, because the country, we've got 3,100 plus counties in the United States. And so we want Florida to be a template for the rest of the counties as we work to end public water fluoridation in the rest of America.
And when Scott says this process is easy, he's not saying the process to get fluoride out necessarily, which it can be, but the process to stop the fluoridation once the law is passed. That click of a button by a gentleman who works for the water department. So, Scott, I also want to emphasize that you can attest to this. After your numerous wins in Florida, we have, our audience of hundreds of thousands across the U.S. are like, help us do this. Will you do this for us? And you hear him talking about how there's a slate of testimony on the ground. There are voters there on the ground, they're showing up. And so it's not something we can necessarily do for you. But if you're interested in your fluoride out of the water, then there's ways that we can coach you and help you and share the template for success.
Yeah, absolutely true. I mean, Fluoride Action Network, there's just a wealth of information there to be used by local health freedom advocates in their local community. In the state of Florida, we're learning who these health freedom advocates are in county to county. There's been some significant people, Justin Harvey, of course. My wife Jill has been involved in the effort from start to finish. Bailey Kuykendall, Leah, Dr. Joelle Bohemier, co-founder of Stand for Health Freedom as well. So it doesn't get done by 1 or 2 people. It gets done by a team of people. And, but we're providing the tools. We provided the wins early on that are a template for others to kind of mirror what we've done. It's very exciting.
So I understand in your case, Michael, that the EPA recently requested 1-month extension of the ruling to contest the ruling, appeal that. And you're going on 7 years fighting this, and we know it's neurotoxicant. What do you expect to happen next? Is the ruling going to be challenged? Is there a deadline coming up? What does the trajectory look like?
Yes, the EPA recently requested a 1 month extension to file their appeal. And their appeal is currently due May 12th. My hope, given the comments of Robert Kennedy, that the EPA will stand down on this appeal, because if the new administration wants to take a different approach to fluoridation, then challenging the court order asking the agency to take action on fluoridation, is working at cross purposes with that goal. I am hopeful that they will stand down. If they don't stand down, that's a big problem. Why is the new administration seeking to stop action being taken on water fluoridation? That would be a real problem. And, the EPA, Leah, is the only federal agency with the authority to ban water fluoridation. And under this, so the court in our case ordered the EPA to issue a rule, a regulation to address the risk posed by water fluoridation. And in that proceeding that EPA needs to do to issue that rule, EPA can establish a ban. There's no question about it. EPA has that authority in responding to the court order to ban fluoridation from sea to sea in this country. That's what we want to see happen. And if the United States takes that approach, we would follow the lead of most advanced industrialized countries, like almost all of Europe. So it would be very disappointing to see the EPA continue to fight the court on this and to continue to postpone action. So that's what I'm looking to see. My hat's off to Bobby Kennedy for saying what he has already said and for trying to take action at the HHS level. And I certainly welcome that. But the HHS does not have the authority to ban fluoridation. Only the EPA does. So everyone should be keeping their eyes on how EPA responds to the court's order here.
Absolutely. And what would you say, just going back even a little bit, because we're hopeful that this EPA decision is going to be to stand down, allow this ruling to stand and take root and be operationalized. But as it stands for these local advocates who are saying, hey, we don't want to wait on the federal government, they're too slow. What are the top 3 reasons that the U.S. should end water fluoridation now, or that these local municipalities should end water fluoridation in your perspective?
Yeah. The first is something we've already discussed, and that's, fluoride should not be forced on you, by the government. And it should be, as with all other medical treatments, fluoride should be something that you have a right to choose. If you want to use fluoride, great. Go and get some toothpaste from the store. It's not expensive. You can brush it on your teeth, spit it out, right? So there's no reason to force it on people. We shouldn't be taking away their right to choose. So that's number 1. Number 2 is we now know, and some of the testimony that we got from the CDC in this case, we now know that you don't need to swallow fluoride, that the benefits of fluoride for teeth come from the topical contact with the teeth in the mouth. And so given that, any risk that you have from swallowing fluoride is an unnecessary risk. And if it's an unnecessary risk, it's unacceptable to force people to be subjected to that risk. If it's an unnecessary risk, it's unacceptable to force it on people. That's number 2. Number 3 is that when you look at the risks of fluoride exposure, they are serious and they span the lifespan. Okay, like we've obviously talked about IQ and sort of neurodevelopmental concerns, But there's a lot of other concerns, like the impact on bones. There's high quality data linking excess fluoride exposure over long periods of time to bone fractures, including hip fractures. Okay. There's high quality data linking fluoride exposure to arthritis, to joint pain, joint stiffness, conditions like osteoarthritis. There's high quality data linking fluoride to thyroid disease, including hypothyroidism. So there are many health concerns that are out there with fluoride. And, you know, these are concerns like if a lot of people recognize the importance of having high quality food. You don't want pesticides in your food, right? But with your water, it's just as important to have high quality water. You drink it every day. It's such an important part of your health that the last thing you want to be doing is adding a toxic substance to your water that you're drinking for 70 years. There's a whole lot that can go wrong if you have a toxic substance in your water supply. So the reason number 3 is it's a toxic substance that can cause significant adverse health effects and thereby does not belong in our water.
Yeah, those are great. Those are 3 exceptional reasons. I mean, the level of common sense that it's just, I shake my head. It's such common sense as why water fluoridation should end. And, underscoring those points, Michael, is the precautionary principle. And you're dealing with elected officials who are not doctors, they're not toxicologists, they're not dentists, they don't understand the brain, they don't understand the body, and therein is precisely why the precautionary principle should apply. And with all of those points and many more, I try to drive home the precautionary principle. It's an easy out for them. Even if you say fluoride is great, right? What right do I have as an elected official to force a medication on the public via the water with no risk-benefit analysis and no ability to opt out? Council member Bern Barton in Naples, that is precisely what he articulated. It was such a simple message, and it really resonated with the rest of the councilors as well as the citizens that were present in the room. So you bring up great points. The precautionary principle should prevail. And with that said, Michael, I want to ask you a question here, a recent question. We had a success in North Dakota just this week. An incredible success. A success full of a bit of drama. There was a report from CHD that came out about the lobbyists there. And this is Washburn, North Dakota. And they ended 4-1. Can you touch on that? What unfolded with regard to what was revealed in emails and maybe conversations that occurred that might be inappropriate?
Yeah. So what was revealed through public records requests was that there were state officials and city officials from Bismarck. I think the water superintendent for Bismarck, and then you had some government employees at the state level who appeared at these town meetings in Washburn and acted like they were doing it on their own dime, like they're just concerned citizens. And it turns out that they were being paid with government money to go down to this town to promote water fluoridation. And so they were using government funding through, actually the funding came from the CDC at the federal level. So they're using CDC funding to lobby for water fluoridation or lobby to keep this town fluoridated, which one of the Washburn counselors is, raised serious concerns about that it could be violating laws against using government funding for lobbying. So there's that concern. And if you look at some of the emails, Scott, that were revealed, you see, the way these bureaucrats are talking. They're not talking like, hey, let's go down to this community so that we can help educate them about the benefits of fluoride. We think they could use more information, and we believe we could provide that information to them, and that would be a good thing to do. They were talking like we're going to go and crush them like a pancake. And you think to yourself, that's what their job is to do. This is the way they view themselves, right? It just seems like it's bureaucracy run amok, all paid for by our tax dollars, right? The CDC, and this is, Scott, what the CDC has been doing actually for years. They spend millions of dollars each year to give it to state level bureaucrats to go and lobby for water fluoridation.
Right. And these folks, Michael, they're also doctors, they're dentists that take an oath to first do no harm and to provide informed consent. And there's none of that. That's nowhere to be found. There is no risk benefit analysis. There's no weighing the pros and cons. There's no acknowledgement of the harms. I mean, it's really troubling. It's really mind-blowing what these folks will say. And I think that was on full display in North Dakota.
Yeah, and I think it highlights, one of the problems that we've seen with fluoride for decades, and that is that government officials see their job as being cheerleaders for this program, to promote, and to promote some more, not as sort of independent umpires to be weighing this evidence as it comes in of risk and benefit and just telling the public the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Like, just give us the way I look at it, Scott, is the government's job is to give us, the people, the information, the good and the bad. Just let us have the information so that we can make the most informed decision possible for our family. That's what the government's job should be. Give us the information. The government's job should not be to propagandize us with one side of the story, because they've made a determination that, hey, you know what? At the end of the day, the most important thing is to implement this policy, because that's going to be more beneficial for people than having a full appreciation of what's going on. And when they take that approach, they're no longer approaching it like from an objective standpoint. And I think we have all suffered as a result, not just on fluoridation, but even other public health policies. And I just always come back to this, to the view that the government's job should be to give us information, right?
Yeah.
And with water fluoridation, they are literally shoving it down our throats. They are shoving this down our throats, right? That's literally what they're doing with water fluoridation.
Literally.
No pun intended, right? And the maddening thing is, we've seen our government choose experts for us with one-size-fits-all solution like water fluoridation for decades now, and it has not gotten us to a good place. I mean, we're at a failing success rate when it comes to the health of Americans, and we are so done with government choosing our experts. I hope that Secretary Kennedy can lead the charge in returning public health experts to what they are, just as you said, Michael, as informants. They are telling us the good, bad, and the ugly, to use your words, and they will get out of the business of marketing specific solutions and, by God, specific products. So I hope we see that shift in our lifetime, and I'm kind of hopeful. Maybe I shouldn't be, but I know we're running out of time here, and I want to ask a final question that Scott has brought this issue to my attention several times. And I have to admit, Scott, it probably took me 5 times of you bringing this to my attention for me to even realize the significance of it. But I repeated it when I was teaching the other night on detox. And the audience lit up, and that is that the fluoride in our water is not the same fluoride on the periodic table. It's not even pharmaceutical grade fluoride, it's industrialized waste. It's from the pesticide industry, from the fertilizer industry. So, can you talk about the distinction, Michael, of these two different types of fluoride and what's going to happen when fluoridation ends with this stream of chemical waste?
Yeah, the vast majority of the fluoride chemicals that are added to our water in the United States are called silicofluorides, and most of it is called hydrofluorosilicic acid. Okay, it's a highly corrosive um, acidic compound. Okay, and this chemical is captured in the air pollution control equipment of the phosphate fertilizer industry. Okay. So it's the commercial fertilizer industry is the source of these chemicals. They're not, these chemicals, once they're captured in the air pollution control equipment, they undergo no processing. They're barreled up, they're put into trains and tanker cars and just shipped around the country to, various water plants and added to our drinking water. So they're unprocessed chemicals. And there has actually never been a pharmaceutical grade fluoride compound ever added to anyone's drinking water. It's always an industrial waste product. Some people call it industrial byproduct, but people should be clear that this is not this isn't like a nice little calcium pill that you're going to drink that you're going to take as a supplement. This is not that. This is a industrial liquor that is put into tanker cars and trains, and if it's ever spilled, it's a serious emergency because this is a extremely toxic chemical. So if any fluorosilicic acid ever spills, you need to get the hazmat suits on, and it's a serious situation. Now, the proponents of fluoridation have looked at this as, the solution to pollution is dilution. So you take this, industrial waste and you drip it into tap water at a low enough concentration and all is fine and good. That's kind of been the approach to it, right? So what happens if we end fluoridation? Well, these companies that are currently capturing this and selling it as a product are going to now have to treat it as a waste. And they probably will do so by just dumping it into their acidic wastewater ponds that they have. If you go to Florida in Hillsborough County and Polk County, you will see some of these commercial fertilizer companies, and they are notoriously dirty industries with major environmental pollution affecting local waterways and whatnot. There's been a longstanding problem with pollution, fluoride pollution, as well as other pollution from these plants. So, if we end water fluoridation, Leah, they're supposed to dispose of this in, hazardous waste landfills and things like that. But they have shown a tendency to just dump this stuff into their settling ponds on site.
You'll have to unmute, Scott.
Okay, my last question, Michael. At Stand for Health Freedom, we are excited with our new Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. We're excited to support the MAHA movement. We've heard him say recently that he is going to request that the CDC drop their endorsement of public water fluoridation. Do you think that'll happen?
I certainly hope so. I've been around long enough to see that, the federal bureaucracy has a way of moving very slowly with fluoride and hindering progress. So I have sort of a built-in skepticism about even what, Robert Kennedy clearly wants to do everything he can to change things at the HHS on fluoride. And I have no doubt about that. He seems very sincere and genuine. But we're talking about a massive bureaucracy. And you have officials within that bureaucracy who have promoted water fluoridation aggressively for decades. And, will RFK have the strength and stamina to be able to, beat the bureaucrats? I'm certainly very encouraged to see him taking on the fight and trying to do it. But I don't think that we should lose sight of how difficult, Scott, this can still be, right?
Yep. Yep. And on that point, Michael, that's why it is so crucial that the citizens, we the people at a local level, support the initiatives far and wide and give Robert F. Kennedy and the other public health officials that are trying to bring change, we give them an overwhelming level of support.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to your earlier point, Scott, is people should not wait for the federal bureaucracy to finally come out with some unified, position on fluoridation. People should be acting now on their local level, going to their town council and city council, letting them know about the court decision, finding that this policy poses unreasonable risks to our children's health, letting them know about the National Toxicology Program's conclusion that fluoride reduces IQ, letting them know even about the HHS secretary's concerns about fluoridation. I mean, these are all really new and significant developments, and we can't presume that our city and town councilors know about these things. I think when many city and town councils hear about this, they're going to want to take action, just like so many of those Florida communities have that you've worked with, Scott. So we have a tremendous amount of information right now to take action with. And it's really, really encouraging to see how many communities are taking that action. Scott, the day after the court's ruling came out last fall, 2 towns in New York stopped fluoridation. Okay, and I said, I think we're going to see Operation Snowball now. Let's begin Operation Snowball. Just let this get bigger and bigger and bigger with more and more communities ending this practice. And I think that every time a community ends fluoridation, or a county, or a city, every time it happens, it makes the next victory easier to get, because you're building and building, you're building a bigger foundation. Because it's, I think now in Florida, Scott, you guys have done such a great job that when the next council hears this issue, they're like, why aren't we doing what they've already done? Like, why are we the oddballs now? Like, let's continue the momentum, right? So I think we're seeing a change in the psychology at the local level. Like people are like, yeah, why are we still doing this? Why aren't we doing what all these other counties are doing and ending this? So I think the psychology of fluoride is changing now in a really healthy way. And I've never been more encouraged and more optimistic about our country's chances now with moving forward in a healthier way with how we use fluoride. there is a place for fluoride. There's a place for fluoride in toothpaste and some dental products, but there's no place for fluoride in terms of adding it to drinking water. And I really feel like we are now reaching that point, long overdue, to move our country into the 21st century, follow the course of Europe, and end this forced medical treatment through people's drinking water.
Absolutely. It's you hit on two major points of policy impact, and one of those is you have to ask. You have to show up and ask for this to happen. And the second point is that policymakers like nothing more than knowing that they're following something that has happened somewhere else. Show me where it's happened before. Show me that it hasn't been overturned by a judge in the local area. And that success is attributable to you, Michael and Scott. You've taken and harnessed that on the ground and have over a 95% success rate. So we can talk about the 21 wins over the last 12 months, and that's fantastic, but it's at a 95% success rate. I don't know what that comes out to in a batting average. Maybe you gentlemen know that, but I'm pretty encouraged. So thank you so much, Michael, for your work. I want to know, how can people come up behind you and support you in bringing this across the finish line? Like, where do people follow you and follow the case?
Well, I'm now on Twitter. So if you search, I'm there, and I post on Twitter with certain, developments regarding the case. So that's certainly one source one way to follow my work. Then you have great groups. You have Scott. You have Stand for Health Freedom. You have Fluoride Action Network, Moms Against Fluoridation. There's a network of organizations now working to raise awareness about fluoride. And so, yeah.
Thank you. We appreciate it. And if you are listening and you want fluoride out of your water, leave a 5-star review on this episode. Tell us your county and your state if you're willing to do that. Just your state is fine, but even telling the county would show where we have this interest and support. Because, friends, we are on the brink of a tipping point, that snowball effect Michael referenced. And thanks to the grassroots warriors like Scott and those that have shown up, and the attorneys like Michael, who will live through these long cases and see them through. So this isn't just a podcast, one dream, it's a movement. So together we're going to make a difference. Go to standforhealthfreedom.com and join us to be a part of this specific effort. All right, guys, talk soon.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks, Leah.